In 2025, Greece hits a record. 40 million tourists arrive. The beaches shine. The islands are full. The world calls it paradise. But for Greeks, that paradise is pain. In Athens, rents jumped 23% in 1 year. The minimum wage? Only 880 euros a month. One small apartment now eats a whole salary. People choose food or rent, never both. Families drown in bills. Young people leave their homes. Tourists post sunsets on Instagram. Locals live with empty fridges. This is not recovery. This is another crisis. Greece once begged for an 11 billion euro bailout. Today the debt is different. Not numbers on paper, but the cost of survival. Imagine living under the Acropolis and still not affording your life. Imagine tourists drinking cocktails while you pack to leave your own city. Greece looks rich on the outside, but inside, people are breaking. The so-called recovery has turned into a living nightmare, and this is the story no one wants to tell. The story begins in 2009. Greece fell into one of the worst crises in modern Europe. Banks collapsed, jobs vanished. The country begged for help. The EU and IMF stepped in with giant bailout deals. Over 110 billion euros was promised. Later, even more followed. But the rescue came with a price. Cuts, taxes, austerity that broke ordinary people. Unemployment soared to 27%. For the youth, it was even worse. More than 60% of young Greeks had no work. A whole generation lost its chance at a future. Doctors left for Germany. Engineers went to Britain. Nurses flew to the Gulf. The brightest minds packed their bags and never returned. The bailout kept banks alive, but crushed wages. It saved the system, but drained the people. For many, it felt less like a rescue and more like a slow punishment. Shops closed, pensions shrank, homes were lost. The streets of Athens filled with protests. Ordinary Greeks shouted what leaders would not say. The debt had become a ghost that never left. Even when headlines declared recovery, the scars remained in every empty wallet and every missing young face. Greece survived, yes, but at a terrible cost. And so the question rose. If the debt years broke so much, what kept Greece alive after the crisis? Didn't tourism finally bring the country back to life? By 2024, Greece set a new record. Over 40.7 million tourists arrived. Airports overflowed. Islands were packed. Hotels reported full bookings. The economy showed a surplus of 18.8 billion euros. On paper, Greece looked like a miracle. But behind the numbers, a darker story grew. Every visitor needed a bed. And so short-term rentals like Airbnb spread like fire. Apartments once rented to families were suddenly turned into tourist flats. Landlords pushed tenants out. Leases ended overnight. People who lived in Athens for years were forced to pack and leave. By 2025, the city finally banned new short-term rentals in the center, but the damage was already done. Neighborhoods turned into hotels, shops turned into souvenir stands. The streets felt less like a home and more like a permanent holiday park. For tourists, Greece was a dream. For locals, it was eviction papers taped to their doors. Grandmothers with fixed pensions could no longer pay the new rents. Young workers earning 880 euros a month had no chance at housing at all. Tourism brought prosperity, but not for the people who lived there. It filled state accounts, but it emptied family homes. This was the great divide of modern Greece. Tourist prosperity versus citizen poverty. A nation celebrated for its beauty, but one where its own people struggled to stay. And as rents soared higher and higher, the housing market made things even worse. In Greece, the dream of a safe home has turned into a disaster. Since 2019, rents in the Attica region have risen by more than 54%. Paychecks stayed small, bills grew larger, and housing costs crushed the middle class. Across Europe, Greece now ranks near the top in the rent-to-income burden. For millions, housing takes more than they can earn. A worker may clock full hours, but still go home knowing they are falling behind. Families cut food budgets just to cover rent. Parents live with their children longer than they ever planned. Dreams of buying a flat? Almost impossible. And behind the surge lies a quiet, powerful engine. The golden visa. Foreign investors poured into Athens, buying properties not to live in, but to rent out or flip for profit. Entire blocks were swallowed by investment firms. Prices jumped far beyond what ordinary Greeks could afford. Locals found themselves locked out of their own neighborhoods. Tourists and investors saw opportunity, but residents saw eviction notices and a future where home was no longer theirs. Yes, the government spoke of reforms, rent controls, subsidies, restrictions on visas. But for many Greeks, these came too late or too weak to make a difference. The housing trap was sealed. Citizens worked hard, yet the system always kept them one step behind. Why didn't those promised reforms protect the people who needed them most? Greece once protected its homes. Neighborhoods were for families, not investors. But then came the Golden Visa program. Residency in exchange for buying property. Foreign money flooded in. Developers rushed to sell. Banks welcomed the cash. At first, it looked like recovery. But soon, the cracks appeared. Apartments were bought not to live in, but to flip, to rent, to speculate. Locals found themselves locked out. Prices climbed higher and higher. By 2024 to 25, the entry price rose to 800,000 euros. But the market was already broken. Demand no longer matched Greek incomes. A flat once affordable to a teacher now belonged to an overseas investor. Entire blocks of Athens stood half empty, waiting for profit, not for families. Young couples gave up on owning a home. Parents saw their children forced to leave. The city they built felt sold from under their feet. Cafes closed. Shops turned into offices for real estate agents. Tourists snapped photos of charming streets. Streets where locals could no longer afford to live. Greece became a country for sale. Foreigners gained property. Citizens lost their homes. The divide grew sharper each year. Tourist wealth filled the books, but ordinary Greeks were left with nothing. And all the while, wages stayed frozen. No paycheck could ever catch up with a market built for millionaires. In 2025, the minimum wage in Greece is 880 euros a month. But prices keep rising. Inflation still runs close to 3%. Groceries cost more. Electricity bills eat half a paycheck. Rent swallows the rest. For many workers, nothing is left at the end of the month. They work full hours, yet live like they are always one step from debt. Unions finally had enough. In April 2025, strikes spread across the country. Trains stopped. Airports slowed. Shops closed. Workers filled the streets shouting, "We can't live on this." Their voices echoed through Athens. Their banners told the truth. Wages no longer pay for life. Doctors, teachers, and shop clerks all demanded the same thing. A wage that matches the real costs. But salaries stayed frozen. Meanwhile, daily life grew heavier. Families borrowed just to cover heating in winter. Young people worked 2 jobs and still couldn't pay for their own place. Parents feared their children's future would vanish. The divide grew clear. Tourists spent more in a week than a worker earned in a month. Foreign investors bought homes with cash, while locals stretched wages that no longer stretched. Rising costs on one side, stagnant wages on the other, and in between, millions of citizens trapped in the middle. Everyone knew the problem. But what about the government's so-called solutions? By January 2025, Athens banned new short-term rentals in the center. It was meant to cool the market, but rents had already jumped by double digits. Families were already evicted. By October 2025, the government rolled out nationwide rental standards. Inspectors promised tighter rules, yet the damage had been done years before. Tourist apartments stayed full. Local families still searched for homes they could not afford. At the same time, a new demographic package was announced, 1.6 billion euros to support young parents in housing. But the aid would only start in 2026. For people paying rent today, that date felt like an eternity. Bills came every month. Relief was promised only in the future. The gap between policy and reality widened. Greeks needed action now. Instead, they got deadlines, committees, and delays. Strikes grew louder. Anger spread wider. Citizens felt abandoned, trapped in a system that spoke of solutions while giving none they could use today. The conflict was impossible to miss. An urgent crisis on one side, slow reforms on the other, and in between, lives collapsing under the weight of time. For many, hope ran out. And once again, Greeks did what they had done in the last crisis. They packed their bags. They left their country behind. Because if survival wasn't possible at home, they would search for it elsewhere. During the last crisis, more than 500,000 young Greeks left the country. Doctors filled hospitals in Germany. Engineers worked in London. Teachers moved to the Gulf. It was called a brain drain. And now, in 2025, the pattern is returning. Rents climb. Wages freeze. Families can't keep up. The only option many see is to leave. Airports are once again filled with one-way tickets. Parents stand at gates, watching their children vanish into new lives abroad. The heartbreak is silent but deep. A nation grows smaller every time a graduate departs, and the numbers show it clearly. Greece now has one of the lowest fertility rates in all of Europe. A shrinking base trying to carry a heavy burden. The conflict is cruel. A nation that needs its youth most is losing them fastest. Every apartment left empty for a tourist is one less home for a young family. Every stalled policy means another goodbye at the airport. What remains are parents, alone in neighborhoods now filled with strangers, asking if their children will ever return. This is the quiet cost of the new crisis. Not just money, not just wages, but the slow disappearance of a nation's future. Which leaves the hardest question of all. What kind of future does Greece have left? To the outside world, Greece looks like paradise. Tourists see blue seas and white houses. They see luxury hotels and endless sunsets. For visitors, life feels simple, cheap, and free. But for Greeks, the same land feels like a prison. The rent is too high. The wages are too low. Every bill feels heavier than the last. By 2025, Athens was ranked one of the hardest capitals in Europe to rent a home. That single fact shows the divide. Foreigners come for holidays and live better than locals in their own city. A tourist can rent a flat for 2 weeks, while a Greek worker cannot afford it for a year. Luxury apartments are built for outsiders. Locals live with their parents into their 30s. Neighborhoods shine for cameras, but behind the walls, families struggle to buy even basic food. This is the cruelest irony. Greece, the brand, is thriving. Greece, the reality, is breaking. The posters in airports show smiling faces, but the real face of Greece is tired, angry, and ignored. Citizens feel their own country has been stolen. They see tourists live better lives than they do, in the very streets where they were born. For some, it no longer feels like home. It feels like they are guests in a place that once was theirs. This is the final conflict. A nation praised as paradise for the world, but experienced as a daily prison for its own people. And it is here, in this sharp divide, that the ultimate truth begins to emerge. Greece was declared a success story. The bailouts ended, the markets opened, tourism hit record highs. On paper, the country had recovered, but the recovery was never for the people who lived there. It was for the outsiders, for the airlines, for the cruise companies, for the investors buying flats they would never live in. The Greeks themselves remain trapped in a spiral they cannot escape. The crisis today is not debt. The real crisis is affordability. Every rent increase pushes families closer to the edge. Every bill leaves less food on the table. Every paycheck buys less than the one before. This is the twist no one wanted to admit. The numbers can rise. The GDP can grow. The tourist arrivals can break records. But if the citizens cannot live with dignity, then the recovery is an illusion. A healthy country is not measured in arrivals. It is measured in whether people can afford a home, raise a family, and plan a future. That is the test Greece is failing. The emotional wound is deep. Greeks watch tourists thrive in their streets while they struggle to survive in the shadows. Paradise on the postcard, prison in real life. It is the cruel echo of the hook. The world sees Santorini sunsets. The locals see empty fridges and unpaid rent. And it leaves one haunting question. If Greece cannot house its own people, if survival is impossible in the land of supposed recovery, then what is the meaning of recovery at all? For many Greeks, the dream of living at home is already gone. The streets they grew up in now belong to tourists. The apartments their parents built are owned by investors. And the future they hoped for has slipped into exile. This is not just about money. It is about life itself. Economics is not numbers on a chart. It is the rent due at the end of the month. It is the fridge that stays empty after the bills are paid. It is whether a young couple can start a family in the country they love. Recovery means nothing if the people cannot live. And yet, this is the silent truth the world ignores. The postcards show paradise. The reality shows pain. If Greece cannot keep its own people at home, then the real debt is not financial. It is human. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden truths reshaping nations. And tell us in the comments, can Greece fix this crisis? Or will another generation be forced to leave?